Now, with all this moving around, what did you do about school?
Well, half the time we skipped. You know, it was tough. And we'd go to a school and they'd say, "Where's this last school you went to?" We didn't know what records or anything else. I go back a little bit. When I was in the first grade, and we lived in that apartment where the fire was and everything, I had a teacher that she was something else. And she said she took a liking to me. Why me, I don't know. But she used to take me, we had separate cloak rooms that you went in and put your coat, hung your coats up in when you come in the wintertime. She used to take me back in the cloakroom and just slap me back and forth in the face, and then she'd give me a candy bar. Well, toward the end of the school year, I had a nervous breakdown because of her, and they hospitalized me. The doctor said it was a nervous breakdown. But as I looked at my behavior back then, I think I was hyperactive more than anything else. But it might have been a combination anyway. They had me in this hospital, and it was a big ward. I mean, there was like 10 beds in it, all with younger kids in it. And we had they were like cribs with sides up. So, of course, I was in the first grade. And they had a toy box on the end that hung where people brought you toys and magazines, comic books and stuff you could store in it. Still get to them. And one night I was having a fit and I took mine and threw it across the floor, and they couldn't get me to be quiet, so they put me in a straitjacket and locked me in a room for the night until I settled down the next day. So I learned then too not to irritate too many adults because they had more power than I did.
Whatever happened with that teacher?
To my knowledge, nothing. She came up to see me one time and I went nuts, and they barred her from coming in again. And I remember then my dad's sister, Ada, was living with us. Ada was her name, I remember her name. And she went to see the teacher and told her if she ever even spoke to me again, she'd just beat the living shit out of her to stay away from me. And that was the end of that.
Now, did you tell your parents at any point what was going on with this teacher? Or?
After I went to the hospital.
Oh, okay.
Because what happened is I told the doctor.
Oh.
And of course he passed it on. But as near as I know, they didn't do anything to the teacher, because when I went back to the second grade, that was my first grade teacher. When I went back to the second grade, she was still there, but she wasn't allowed to talk to me or even speak to me in the hallways. Let's see, when I was in the second grade, I remember I got an award for being one of the outstanding readers because I read better than most of them in class. But that's something I always liked to do, is read. But when we were little kids, we would get a quarter, go to the movies, get a box of popcorn and a drink, and we'd go in when it opened at noon and stay till 11 o'clock at night and see the same show over and over again. To spend every weekend we got a quarter to go to the movies. And we loved that because it was something to do. But I remember when I was in the second grade, me and this one friend of mine, he lived on the third floor of the apartment, front apartment, and we skipped school. And we were filling balloons with water and dropping them out the window. And this one guy came, started up the steps, and we dropped the balloon out and hit him. And here was a truant officer looking for us. Of course, needless to say, we got it for that too, for skipping school.
Now, you say you like to read, but
yes.
you moved around a lot. So when did you find the time to read, and what did you read?
I read comic books mostly. Back then, they had Batman and Superman. Those were the big comic books, and they were like 2 or 3 cents a piece, you know. So anytime we could get the money, we'd go buy a comic book. And I remember at one time, I wish I had them now, the original Batman, and when he first came out, and the original Superman. And then they had a Captain Marvel then, and but that was the superheroes back then. But I read comic books and I read science. I don't remember the time or the age, but I do remember one time when my dad came back. And I was with my dad and my mom, and my brother and sister, we were all together, all 5 of us, and we were hitchhiking, and it was getting dark, and alongside the road was an abandoned semi-trailer, one of the boxed-in ones. The cab wasn't there, somebody had parked the trailer there. So we all slept in that all night, and then got up the next morning, and my dad walked down into the field and got some field corn, brought it back, and we cooked it on built a fire and cooked it on an open fire to eat, something to eat. And then we went on into town, and once again they found a place to live. But once we got settled, my dad took off again. Now, going back to my real dad, one of the things that was a problem with him was, besides being an alcoholic, he was a deserter from the Army. And back then, military people during the war, their families would get checks in the mail to help offset their expenses. It wasn't a whole lot. I can't even guess how much it was, but I can guess that it wasn't a whole lot. But back then it didn't cost a whole lot. But anyway, he stole a few of those, forged the signatures and cashed them, and he got caught. And of course he went to prison for it. Between that and being a draft dodger or a deserter, I forget which it was, they said. Anyway, he spent quite a few years in prison, but that was later on too. I remember the one apartment we lived in, which was just 2 big rooms. There was like a kitchen, a big kitchen, and a big room for a bedroom that had a fireplace in it. And then my brother and sister and I and my mom were living there, and my dad showed up with a girlfriend. Don't ask me how that worked, but my mom moved out and left us kids with him and this girl, this woman he was living with. And we all slept in one bed, all get in bed at night. But we had this fireplace, and we used to break up, go down to these places where they shipped in stuff and get wood and stuff and bring it up and burn it in that fireplace to heat the place. That's the only way we could heat it, because we couldn't afford any gas. We had kerosene lanterns for for lights, and we had orange crates. They were like partitioned in the middle, and we nailed them on the windsill, and that's what we used for a refrigerator in the wintertime. We'd set our canned milk and stuff out there to keep it from spoiling. But we used to sit around that fireplace at night and tell ghost stories, and that was fun. But we'd go down to the hospital, and at night, after dark, I can remember it was always after dark, because it was always real late at night, and in the summertime that's got to be late after dark. My dad would go down there, and he would get from where they cooked the food and stuff, they'd give him all the leftover stuff, and he'd bring home like rice pudding and mashed potatoes and gravy and stuff. So probably we ate pretty good for that period of time. But I think it was only a couple weeks that he was there, and then my mom came back and they moved out. And I remember another time, there was just me and my sister at this time. And we lived in this apartment above the bar. My mom hung around that. My mom was a drinker too. I don't think she was an alcoholic, but she hung around the bars a lot. Picked up a lot of boyfriends. I do remember that. And she hung around this bar, and this one night she gave us each, my sister and I, each a quarter to go to the theater. And we went to the movies, and we're sitting in the movies watching this movie. And my sister said, about 5 rows down, and how she saw him, I'll never know, with the lights out. She said, Dad's down there, my Clarence. And I said, you're kidding. She says, no, that's him. So we went down, and sure enough, it was him. So when the show was over, he took us out, and he had a girlfriend with him. He took us out and got us something to eat, and took us home, and went in the bar, talked to my mom, and come back out and said, how would you guys like to come spend a few days with me? And whoever the girl was, I don't remember her name. We said, okay, so we went with him and spent a couple days, a week or so with him. And at that time he was on the wagon. He was sobered up because this woman had him straightened around, supposedly. And but he was still meaner than hell, because I remember he made this vegetable soup, and I hated vegetable soup back then. I couldn't stomach it. And he'd set it down in front of you, and if you didn't eat it, you sat there all day and all night. And as soon as he'd turn his back, my sister would take a bite of hers and a bite of mine. She ate mine for me to protect me. But this one time he was drunk, and he had a bowl of hot peppers. We wanted to eat one, and I said, no, I'm not going to eat it. And he tried to shove it down my throat. Of course, I held my mouth, and he rubbed it all over my face and in my eyes. And it was burning so bad they had to take me to the emergency room and flush my eyes out and put some kind of cream or something on my face. And I don't know what he told him that happened, but he didn't get in any trouble. And I remember we lived with him. There was all 5 of us together again in Indianapolis, Indiana. We moved to, and he was working at a redhead filling station. Because I remember back then, you probably don't know anything about a redhead filling station, but that was one of the big filling station chains then, the Redheads. And he come home drunk one night. We had this apartment where the whole apartment shared one bathroom and tub. You had to wait your turn to get in the tub. Anyway, he come home drunk one night, told my sister and I and my brother to get the hell out of the house. We were on the 3rd floor, I remember. To go downstairs and play. It was daylight. So we did, and we were down there playing, and finally he stuck his head out the window and told us to come up. And when we come up, my mom was laying on the floor, hurt. And I said, what happened? He said, she fell off a chair. And she said, you lying SOB, you kicked the chair off from under me when I was trying to change the light bulb. So he gave me a nickel and told me to go call an ambulance. And I called an ambulance, and they wouldn't send an ambulance because we were renters. If you weren't a property owner, you couldn't get an ambulance in Indiana at that time, or Indianapolis at that time. So I didn't know what we were going to do, but finally she was able to get back up. And we caught a bus, left him there, and me and my mom and brother and sister went back to Cincinnati and over to Amelia to live with Nellie and Walt, her sister and his husband. And she left us there, me and my sister, and I don't know what she did with my brother, but she took off again. And that's the last time I ever saw my dad, was when we left him in Indianapolis, Indiana. I haven't seen him or heard from him since. I know he's dead now, that much I know. His brother used to live right up the street here. He used to be our trash man when I was adopted, well, with my adopted parents. When we had the coal furnaces, he'd pick up the ashes and stuff in the trash. And his name was Clifford. And so Cliff told me a lot of things about him, but he told me that he died with a heart attack in an alley in Chicago. They found him dead, that he had a heart attack when he was about 59, I think they said he was at that time. But it was brought on by alcoholism and everything, you know. But he had gotten drunk in the freezing cold, and in Chicago it could get pretty cold. But that he was dead, so I never saw him or heard from him after that time in Indiana.